Welcome back to the Darius Gant Show. I'm your host, Darius Gant, as well as founder and CEO of Tesoro AI, where we help companies to build and scale their AI solutions and AI teams. On this podcast, we focus on cutting-edge technology, more specifically, artificial intelligence. By getting up close and personal with the founders who are building these technologies, we get an opportunity to understand exactly what problems that AI is solving in the real world and in business. An added benefit is we get to see how these founders are building out these technologies and scaling their startups. In this episode, we sit with Diego Oppenheimer, who is the co-founder and CEO of Algorithmia. Algorithmia is an enterprise MLOps platform, machine learning operations. Essentially, they're helping companies to put machine learning models into production faster and more cost efficiently. Diego himself spent several years at Microsoft, where he helped deliver some of the company's most used data analysis applications. That includes Microsoft Excel, Power Pivot, Power BI, and SQL Server. He also spent several years mentoring startup founders as a mentor for Techstars. If you or your team is considering building an AI application or scaling your AI team, make sure you reach out to the team here at Tesoro AI. We've assembled the leading experts in data science and machine learning. So whether we're talking about AI strategy, staff augmentation, custom software development, or data labeling, we've got a strong team here that has your back. Head over to www.tesoroai.com. All right, without further ado, let's hop in and chat with Diego. All right, Diego, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually wanted to understand your background a little bit. It looks like in the beginning you were looking at some things in, what was it, PricewaterhouseCoopers, some banking, did some consulting, but I'm curious how you got started once you, I guess, came out of university. Did you go directly into kind of tech development, or did you get your feet wet in the accounting finance side first?
Sure. So I did my undergrad and grad school at Carnegie Mellon, and I specialized in data analytics and advanced analytics. So I first started out my career in going towards finance, but actually doing data analytics in finance. And then had an opportunity to go and help build out Microsoft's BI stack, so business intelligence stack. And that's when I actually made the move from essentially New York to Seattle to go work at Microsoft, and built out products like Excel and SQL Server and Power Pivot, Power BI. Those are some of the products I got to work with. But my entire career has been in data and like building tools to analyze and work with data.
Okay. And so what was that like at Microsoft? You built your career around data there, but then just thinking about like how you want to position yourself to understand or be able to learn about artificial intelligence, potentially how to build applications or in use cases in AI.
Yeah, there was a kind of a natural path and then a somewhat unnatural path. So the unnatural path, I'll start with that. My co-founder, who I was really good friends from undergrad, he was like a PhD in artificial intelligence. So like he had gone straight down that. He had studied this. He was in machine learning. He wanted to be he had gone the academic route. And we talked all the time, and kind of we talked about how this was probably going to be the most influential technology that we were going to like see in our lifetime. We talked a lot about what the effects are and how it would approach. And then one of the things that from my background made sense was, if you think about BI and traditional analytics, like it's always about looking at the past, having a hypothesis, and then just applying a hypothesis to the past and just having the data kind of reconfirm that. So if you think about what you're doing with a dashboard or what you're doing with data reporting, it's all about understanding, hey, historically this happened, and we think this happened because of this, and then we can make decisions and then look at future historical data and then say, what those decisions did they affect in one way or another. There was a pretty stark move around like 2011 where predictive analytics started becoming a lot more important in that. So, hey, we are now looking at things like we have signals from the past, but we're really trying to predict future items live and the probability that they're in one way or another. Right. And as those kind of predictive analytics started becoming more and more, like my own career where I was working on tooling for data, like started moving much more towards the predictive analytics side. and predictive analytics, moving more towards machine learning. And that's how that journey went from mostly focusing on data and tooling for historical data, moving to more predictive ML perspective was kind of like my personal journey with it.
Okay. Okay. So then I guess, did you ever dive deeply into kind of developing ML algorithms, things very less so kind of data science, but getting onto the machine learning engineering side?
Yeah, so myself, like developing algorithms, I've implemented some of them. But no, I never took an academic sense of going in building my own kind of like k-means clustering. My co-founder is a published author and like academic in
Yeah.
that space and has his own algorithms and stuff like that. But for me, it was always been about helping build tooling that
Right.
allows kind of people to work like with data. So my technical background was actually always in systems and connecting data systems and working in that space. And so, yeah, I absolutely worked with Spark and technologies, but like, did I go build a library in MLlib? No, absolutely not.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And it seems like you were, based on the work that you were doing, right, building this tooling, you have to understand, well, who's going to be using this tooling, really connected to the user, right, the end user, and trying to figure out, okay, what's the greatest value that they can get out of the tool? What's the pain point that I'm going to be able to solve with these tools that I'm building? Were there specific types of industries or groups that you were focused on in that process?
Well, I started my career in finance. And so for me, and especially if you look at the timing, like I finished my grad school in 2007. It was like right at the height of, everybody wanted to go work in finance. I
Yeah.
had studied kind of data analytics applied to financial engineering. That was where I thought I wanted to go. And I did go that way. What I realized more from a career perspective, what I liked overall is helping people tell stories with data.
Okay.
And to me, that was always fascinating. And I had been enthralled by it because my first internship, I started building Cognos like crystal reports. And I remember like my first internship, I was with a consultant where I was attached to that consultant. And we went to a customer and he's like, I'm going to tell you something about the business that you don't know, your business that you don't know. And I was like, wow, that is the most confident thing I've ever heard in my life. And that's amazing. Like that is quite ballsy to be able to go actually and say that to somebody. And then he did. He like grabbed some data and some CSV files about her latest sales and loaded it up into that Cognos report and put some graphs on and be like, you see this, and that customer was just like mind blown. He's like, wow. And he's like, yeah, this is why you should work with us and stuff like that. And I was like, cool, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be able to help people interpret their businesses and make their businesses better through data. And that just led through getting deeper and deeper from a tech perspective, but also like always tying it back to what are you trying to do, right? What's the business metric we're moving, right? In the world of BI and the world of machine learning, like at the end of the day, we're doing, especially in the world of machine learning, we're trying to do an optimization, right? Are we trying to like increase profit? Are we trying to like increase revenue? Are we trying to reduce costs? Are we trying to automate? So like, what's the business metric that we're trying to move? Right. That's always at the core of any of these implementations. Otherwise, it's a science project. Nothing wrong with science projects. It's just not. I've been in enterprise my whole life, so like super important, just not my focus.
Yeah, very interesting. So I'm curious, as you then came up with the idea of Algorithmia, right? As you mentioned, your focus has been on tooling, but I'm curious what pain point you saw where you said something needs to be done about this particular issue.
Yeah, so when we started, it was really like my co-founder, so it was his idea, and he started like with this. He was really frustrated with the fact that like he spent a lot of time building the algorithms, building the data models, building the ML models, and it was pretty much impossible to consume. Like you had to go build all the infrastructure around it, everything. There was just a big gap, and so we were saying, hey, this is the most important technology out there, and there's steps missing. And when we looked at where the gaps were in the space, we saw really interesting data tooling and how to. I mean, it's not big data. The big data tooling wasn't really like new, right? There was like massive amounts of like ETL tools and transformation tools, and they could always be better, but it was a lot.
Right.
There was a growing number of what I would call kind of like data science, early data science workbenches or tooling for modeling and tracking models. And there was essentially no tool. Then it was like, okay, great. You got to an ML model. Now I need to actually deploy it and run it. And that was like full Wild West. Like you're on your own. You have to do everything yourself. And this is like pre-containers, pre-Kubernetes, all this happened now, right? But it was like you have to go build an entire thing from scratch. And most companies went and did build a whole bunch of stuff from scratch because they had to. And so that was just a space where like, hey, I think we can make this better. I think there's a world here where containerization and APIs and being able to package and deploy and automate infrastructure from the point of when a model is created, an ML model is created, all the way to its runtime, like there was just an opportunity to do that and provide a much better experience and faster experience, and that's what we went to attack.
Yeah, very interesting. And one of the things, and we talked about this earlier, right? Like DevOps is a space that's growing rapidly. You guys refer to MLOps, right? And can you give us some basis for what is MLOps, right? And why is it important?
Yeah, I'll start with what matters to DevOps, right? And like the definitions kind of change, but it's a set of processes and tooling to make deploying software or applications faster, more scalable, and more secure, right? In a secure way. That's really what you want to focus on, right? You want it to be like fast, secure, and scalable. Okay, great. So now if we wanted to give those principles to the world of machine learning, how do we deploy models faster while preserving security, while preserving scalability? That's essentially what MLOps is. Now, it's different from pure play DevOps because models drift, models behave differently. We are actually dealing with probabilistic code versus deterministic code. So in its essence, like the architecture is different, but the principle of what's trying to be achieved, which is deploy faster, get into production faster, maintain security, maintain governance, maintain scalability, provide scalability, those principles are the same. So really MLOps is just grabbing those principles and applying it to the world of ML. I like to say that essentially like MLOps is building a highway for, like you have a dirt road which between your discovery and kind of like model building process and your production system. And this is building a five-lane highway so that you can go real quick, really fast down that. Now, just because you have the highway doesn't mean you don't need toll booths, you don't need patrol cars. These are all important from control perspective, but really it's about that, right? Like increasing that speed and throughput.
Okay, super helpful. So then if we were to think, right, of the entire, ML pipeline, right? Let's say, point one is, look, we've collected our first set of data. And then the endpoint is, look, we've made a prediction that gets displayed on the screen, or however that prediction is executed and displayed. I guess, where does what you all created at Algorithmia start and end?
Yeah, so we start at the kind of like when you have a release candidate for a model to go into production. So let's just say you have you're training your model in TensorFlow, you got your Jupyter notebook, you got down to a point where it's like, hey, this model has the right accuracy, has all the right characteristics that we want. At that point, you directly push it into our platform. We automatically deploy it, we run it at scale, we engage all the authentication, security, monitoring systems, and provide all the loopbacks back into the system if you need to go trigger that. And it's all done in an automated way. So we start when there's a candidate model to put into production, and then version every single future candidate of that model, and then help you doing pipelines. But it's at that point where it's like, hey, I've created a model.
And from what you've seen, right? Well, who are the primary users? Is it the data scientists and machine learning engineers who are in the system?
Yeah, so it's combo. A lot of times our enterprise product is brought to the table by like the IT organization to support ML engineering and data science across the organization. So the actual like end user, would be a data scientist or an ML engineer because they're pushing their model, but like the actual setup of the platform, how it gets integrated into all the like corporate systems, security, authentication, governance, all of that is done by IT essentially. But once it's done, it's all set up, now it's just like you have you give a lot of autonomy to the data science and ML teams because they can automatically go through it. They know that the controls are there. They know that security's set up. They know everything is in place for them. So they can move at very, very fast. And again, the goal here is to allow the data science team to move as fast as they want. They're the fastest moving software team in an organization, very much on purpose. And that's a good thing because it's very iterative. It's all about exploration. You have to fail a lot to get to success. And so what's the best way is to really just allow a very quick loop back through the process for that to happen.
So I'm curious, as you look at, or as you have these conversations with customers, what metrics might you, are you saving the data? Are you citing that, hey, look, we save data scientists X amount of time? I'm curious, as it relates to ROI, what are the specific things that you're able to hone in on?
So I actually have a whole top 10 KPIs and measures that you should be using for ML. It's on our website. So if you go to algorithmia.com and on the resource center, you'll see a lot of these, but there's some things that you can start tracking. For example, like time it takes from candidate to production, right? Because every single minute a model is not in production, there's a level of decay, right? So there's a time to value metric. There is how much time data scientists and machine learning engineers are spending on non-modeling tasks, right? And a big part of that is always in the data acquisition and cleaning and labeling. That's always a big part. But then okay, what else, right, is going on there? Are they spending 3 hours a day dealing with IAM rules in AWS? That's a problem, right? And there's also then how you tie the actual value the model is giving. So here's okay. So let's just say you build a fraud model, and the fraud model can reduce fraud by, let's say 1.2% or 1.5% to make that math easy, right? Overall. Okay, great. So what you're telling me is that every day that model is not in production, you're losing an extra 1.5% revenue in fraud. Yeah. That's a big number. How do you track that? How do you know that, right? And so again, if you're doing $10 million in transactions, that stuff adds up really, really quickly. So this is how you actually start doing ROI and measurements, which is, okay, well, you can look at what's the cost, the opportunity cost of not having these models and these pipelines run in production, right? You can look at the time it's taking the organization to get them into production as a measure of efficiency. You can use it as a measure of productivity for the individual data scientists and machine learning engineers. And then the other place is the other measure is around how much time doing maintenance for the system that you have to do, because that kind of measures technical debt. So a lot of the folks that have gone down the do-it-yourself path are pushed together a whole bunch of open source components, which is great if you have the time and resources to continue maintaining those pieces all together for the next 3-4 years. And so organizations that are successful going down that path are the ones that will continuously invest in platform teams, and continuously building and hiring people and recycling knowledge as those people leave. But if you are not dedicated to that, you're creating a hole for your organization. So these are some of the measures. Again, there's a whole talk about the exact KPIs. I can send them if you want to add them later as a link.
Yeah, no, that definitely.
We have a whole generic, right? It's not a sales pitch, but there's a whole set of KPIs and measures that you can actually use for success here.
Okay. Awesome. And then are these conversations? I mean, you yourself have spent a lot of time in the enterprise, but are you seeing folks interested from the enterprise, medium-sized, small-sized business startups, or is it purely in the enterprise where folks are look, we have the team set up where we can actually use the product?
So I think there's a lot of these enterprises have the most data, and so they have the advantage of being able to actually turn a lot of their data, signals that they've captured inside their systems and use machine learning to adopt those. There's also a lot of enterprises who've been doing some level of machine learning for a long time, especially in things like life sciences and finance and defense, right? And so there's an actual advantage here of just having the data. I've been doing it for a while, and so and a lot of my conversations are biased towards the enterprise because we sell an enterprise product. Yeah. So you have to. Now that doesn't mean that there's not a ton of startups out there looking to build machine learning into their workloads, or those, it really depends. There's some companies that like start from the beginning and say, hey, you know what, like we're a vertical solution, but ML is at the core of what we do,
Right.
and they've spent the time building out how they're going to acquire their data moats and how are they going to refine on those models and how are they going to apply ML to the specific thing, and it's super important. So they start from day one building in a kind of like ML strategy for that organization. Like this could be applied to sales, insurance, whatever industry you want. Data labeling, right? I mean, anything around that.
Yeah, I'm curious as you guys got started. It sounds like you were in a fortunate position where the co-founder you went to school with him, right? So there's already this level of trust. But when you first got started and you were thinking about, okay, well, who are we going to take this product to? There's always this experience where people run where is this company actually leveraging AI? Is this company not actually leveraging AI? And then in the very beginning, how did you all decide who you would target with the product? And at that point, did you have a complete product or were they kind of development partners with you? I'm curious how you kind of, those early days look.
Well, as a product CEO, I would say this product's never complete.
There you go.
Ever, ever, ever. There's always more to build. There's always more to make better. Everything to make better. So I don't believe in the completeness of product knowledge because I worked on Excel. Excel was 30 years old, right? It's still not complete,
Right.
right? I mean, it advances every year. It advances a whole bunch of things. So that's kind of on that. So in the early days, we started out figuring out who would. We had a bigger target around the individual data scientist. So the individual data scientist was a much bigger target for us in the beginning because we wanted to understand the pain for them, where they were, how to make this a lot easier to use, like where were they getting stuck. And so there was a big focus on just getting them on the platform. And still today, we have a free tier where
Okay.
you can go to algorithmia.com and you can set up and start using and deploy models and get loaded with, understand that experience. What we realized over the years was that there was a lot of value inside large enterprises to think holistically about, in the same way they did about DevOps, about MLOps, and how to scale this out, how to replicate it. And so if you have your startup, you have a couple models, even if you have a bunch of models, but like you have like one process, it's all one, like you're all under one thing, like doing a custom platform or building out custom for yourself, like maybe that's the right way to do it. There's not a problem with that. But when you start looking at an organization that's probably going to have data science teams in every single business unit,
Yeah.
and every single business unit might decide to do something slightly different, the inefficiency that happens there at the organizational level just is really, really increases. Also, the risk of not understanding, like, where are my models? Think of banking, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're using models for trading, compliance, loan acquisition. So you have to understand what's going on everywhere. Well, it's really hard to understand what's going on everywhere without some sort of consistency in terms of deployment and runtime and monitoring and stuff like that. And so there's just a desire inside enterprises to, hey, we have a much bigger audience. We have a lot of these teams and we want to start standardizing process for them. So that's why that trend, while we really focused on making the individual experience for the data scientists amazing, it ended up like the people who buy our product are large companies.
Yeah. And was it that those individual data scientists, look, they used the free version and then they were, look, this is incredibly valuable. Let me go talk to whoever leads our IT and we should hop on, we should buy this product. Is that how that developed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything in the dev space today, I think there's a big consensus buy, which is you got to convince the executives, you got to convince the users, you got to convince IT. And so it's really important to be able to tell the message of why is this important to you, why it's important to this person, have focused message for each persona and say, look, this is what you're going to get out of it. This is what you want to do with this. And that's where that comes from.
Yeah. And it sounds like kind of part of that strategy, or I don't know if that
You did mention a strategy from day one, but it's a little bit easier to go for if the data scientist internally is advocating for the product versus you trying to reach out directly to whoever's leading IT, who may or may not even understand what the purpose of the Algorithmia product is from day one.
Yeah, so I think you have to focus on what the problem is, right? And you have to find where people, you're showing them something that's painful to them today and you're making them better, right? At the end of the day, if you can make somebody's life better, everyday work life better, right? And everyday work life could be like the reduce menial tasks I don't want to do, help me get my next promotion, help me get this thing for the business right, whatever that is. If you can achieve that inside an organization, you've built a champion. And when you can build a champion inside an organization, they will go to bat for you, right? They'll go say, hey, we need this. And they'll tell that story internally, and they become that person inside an organization that like sells essentially your product internally. And so that could be in IT, it could be in the data science. It's best when you do all, right? Like when you can actually win them all over, and you can say, hey, look, this is why this is better for you. This is why this is better for you, and be able to tell that story. But it really comes down to understanding what the problem is for that individual and being able to tell them why you're going to make it better, and then believe you, right? Not just telling them.
Yeah. And as you thought about your team internally, you guys started off, you got a PhD, you get someone with a PhD in AI, you got yourself with experience, serious experience on the data side within enterprise. I'm curious, as you thought about the next few hires, like what were the most important positions for you to fill after the initial two founders?
Yeah, well, initially it was like really getting a product off the ground, right? So we essentially hired all engineers for the first, up until I think like the seventh hire. It was everybody was engineer, and I was doing the kind of like business side. And the business side of the early days was really like make sure we're building something that people want. It wasn't really like selling.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, selling is a great signal that you're making things people want, and we actually brought in revenue early on, but the focus was really, in that time, I used my background as a product manager to make sure that we were always talking to customers and taking feedback in. But the first couple hires were all engineers, build the product, right? Just get it off the ground and show that. And the only thing you have to be careful when you take that approach is if it's all engineers and nobody's talking to customers, then you're probably building the wrong thing.
Right.
And so you have to have that connectivity back into who your user base is, why they want to use it, and take that feedback back in. As long as you have that loop, the early couple of days is all about building.
Yeah. Did you have a process for getting that feedback? I mean, you were taking the lead on that, but just in having conversations with these data scientists who were the initial.
Yeah. Again, my background was in that.
Yeah.
And so like I took a lot of the stuff that I learned in school, I learned at Microsoft, I learned at the different places where I worked, like where there's a process of how do you gather requirements, how do you conduct conversations, how do you blah, 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 how do you bring that in? How do you build what people need, not what people want? Because those two things are different. People will ask you, build me this, and like, what is it? The famous like Henry Ford like quote which says, if I built what people wanted, like I would have made a faster horse.
Faster horse, right?
Yeah, so like, I mean that's really true. That's really true, especially if you're building kind of new products. It's like, so you just have to be careful about listening and focusing on the problem. What is the problem that they're trying to solve, not the like bits and boops of your of your feature set.
And I'm actually curious about how you think about that, right? Because if you're seeking feedback, and there's a number of people and they're all going to have their own individual answers, like, hey, if you built this, that would be incredible. How do you determine, okay, well, we're going to focus on, this particular product or this particular feature, when out of a sea of features that your customers may be asking you to build, or that you may see creating a lot of value? How do you prioritize?
Yeah. So the way that we think about it is we've selected a problem space, and our problem space is how do you deploy models, how do you serve models, how do you manage models in production. And we've been like hyper focused on staying in our lane around that. Now, because we stay in our lane there and it's part of a bigger process, a couple of things have come up. Why, first of all, we're an integration first platform, which means we put a lot of effort into integrating easily into the different data science platforms that exist out there, into the different open sourcing tools that exist out there, into the different IT tools that exist out there. So there's like a big effort around like, okay, what is out there? What are our customers using? What do they want to continue using? How do we integrate with that? So that's one big area of it. The other one is like, how do we boil it down to like, what's the actual use case that they're trying to solve? Hey, we want to get this model to run faster in this context with this security thing. Okay, great. Well, we don't want you to tell us, I want you to run on this and that and that. What you want us to tell us is like, we want to figure out is, okay, what they're really trying to do is they have this credit model that is highly sensitive. So it has a whole bunch of security concerns around it. It needs to compute really fast because there's an SLA to it. And it's coming from whatever this platform they built it on. So you have to distill it to those components of like, okay, this is what they're asking us really to do is help them deploy this fraud model. The rest of it is, if you ask them like, what do you want? They'll tell you all the details and everything that they know. But if you really boil it down, they're like, no, they just want to get the fraud model. Okay, great. Now we can actually suggest, well, why don't you do it this way? And then you get the feedback, oh, that wouldn't work because of this reason. Okay, that's a good point. And then you go through that iterative process. But if I just ask them, they're going to be like, put this model in my Oracle database. And we're like, well, no.
Okay, interesting. All right. Now I have a couple other questions, a little bit different than the previous ones, but I'm curious internally. You're a huge believer in tools. What's been your favorite tech tool?
My favorite tech tool. Well, I mean, I'm a huge Excel guy because I work on it. So, like, it's kind of funny. Like, as crazy it is, like, I feel it's one of those tools that I continue finding amazing ways. I couldn't live without it at this point. And I do a lot of stuff on spreadsheets, and it allows me. Even has a programmability model, and it gets stronger with every release. And so, for me, that's one of the tools that I've.
Have you had to fight with anyone over like them using Google Sheets versus the actual Excel?
I don't have I think like what I can do with Excel is very, very powerful. And so it's kind of, everybody makes fun of me for it because like I'll go build stuff that like absolutely has no reason to be built in Excel, but I'm just comfortable with the tool and the programming language in there. So it's just one tool that I just think is super powerful. And at the end of the day, it's still in Excel files is still the largest data store on earth.
Very, very true. Very true. Okay. And next question, who is someone that has inspired you? It can be in AI, it could be in business, but even someone that you may follow for some wisdom that they may share.
Yeah, so maybe not a person, but I'll give you a company.
Okay.
That I always thought was interesting. So I've always been a huge admirer of Tableau. So I've always been a huge admirer of Tableau. I think Tableau in the early days, they really looked at the data space really differently. And they looked at that and said, hey, we're not just a data company. We're actually making people be able to tell data stories, and we're going to focus on the person and making them a hero. And I remember the first conference that I went to, Tableau conference, and like the people there were as excited about being at like an enterprise productivity tool, and they would hate it if I called it that, but that's what it is. Like they were going to get new iPods and iPhones, right? It was just amazing. They were like outside going crazy over this tool, and I was just that passion, being able to actually build a product that has a customer base that is that passionate about it, where it's not about their personal life, but their actual work lives, and they're willing to be that. I've always just found that amazingly inspiring. So I just find that company very inspiring.
So it's not just what they built themselves, but the culture that they actually built within the organization?
Correct.
Awesome. Okay, well, no, that's super helpful. And I also want to think about the folks who are on the data science and machine learning side. You did mention that there's a free version of the product that they could hop on. Where can we find, you mentioned the website, but
yeah, if you go to teams.algorithmia.com, you can sign up for free, or algorithmia.com, you can sign up for free there, and a whole bunch of resources about what we talked about as well. And when I get off of this, I can send you a couple of links if you want to add them to the podcast. Yeah,
we'll definitely put those on the page for folks to check out. But this is
super helpful. Definitely going to be very educational for folks, given that you guys are playing in a new workspace. So again, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to keeping up with you guys' progress.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Diego.